I play some tape on this announcement. You're going to love this one. Hang on a second.
Okay.
I am so proud to confirm that Vice President Harris has earned more than a majority of votes from all convention delegates and will be the nominee of the Democratic Party following the close of voting on Monday.
What happened to the 14 million who voted for Biden in the primaries?
Yeah.
What happened to that pro-democracy?
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, whatever happened to Biden?
Well, and I also think the bigger takeaway is, remember, in 3 years and 7 months, we went from a secure border to no border, and the Democrats just made the border czar their nominee. So, I mean, that's, you can do all the coronation, you can say all the wonderful things you want about Kamala Harris. Safe streets to record crime, $2 gas to $4 gas, and stable prices to record inflation. So that's the record. And I might all be warm and fuzzy and great now, but that doesn't change the facts.
Well, I would add to you, since you got your economist hat on, which I love, the numbers out today, the terrible jobs numbers, the market smackdown of the last two. You're on the front end of a recession, Jim Jordan. You're on the front end of a recession. It's not quite here yet, but the signs are proliferating.
If she wins the election, she wants to raise people's taxes. She wants to take away your health care and all the other left-wing ideologies and positions she has that are only going to exacerbate the already bad economy we have in the Biden-Harris administration.
But don't you think it's odd, this whole thing? I mean, for example, so the DNC has a vote. They don't have a convention. They have a vote today, or they're still voting, or something. I don't understand their system. Democrats, I don't know, Chicago could be a big mess. I have no idea. Maybe they'll cancel the whole thing. They canceled Joe Biden. Nobody can figure that out. They canceled 14 million delegates who voted for him in the primary. Nobody can figure that out. I mean, Biden met the hostages coming home last night, which is wonderful for Americans and their families and so forth. But it was Kamala who did much of the talking for him.
Yeah, you're right. Who knows what's going to happen at this convention? And I like the term you use. Remember, the Democrats are the cancel culture party. And as you said, they just canceled Joe Biden and said, nope, we don't care that you won the primary. You had 14 million people vote for you. Sorry, we don't think you can win. So we're going with someone who we think has a chance. I don't think she's going to, based on the policy, based on the facts we have seen in the 3 years and 7 months that this administration has been in power. But they seem to think they have a better chance, and that's why you got this coronation.
Today, sometime around the middle of the day, I think, Kamala's people put out a press release blaming today's lousy jobs numbers on Donald Trump. Trump is to blame for the unemployment rate. Trump was to blame, you recall, for the 9% inflation rate. Trump was to blame, you may recall, for the crashing economy, which was growing at 6.5%. Trump was to blame for the fracking problems. Trump was to blame for the border problems. Show me where this is, she needs to go into intense therapy. We
had real wages go up when we lowered the taxes on the American people and, frankly, on American business. Lowering that corporate rate was huge as well, which then helps families. And every demographic in the population, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, every demographic, real wages went up, contrary to where they're at now, where the buying power. And if you take your family out to dinner, take your family out to dinner on a Friday night and see how, with inflation, what it costs just to go out to dinner with your family. It's ridiculous.
She picked a radical left man that is, he's got things done that he has positions that are just not, it's not even possible to believe that they exist. He's going for things that nobody's ever even heard of. Heavy into the transgender world, heavy into lots of different worlds having to do with safety. He doesn't want to have borders. He doesn't want to have walls. He doesn't want to have any form of safety for our country. He doesn't mind people coming in from prisons, and neither does she.
Jim Jordan spoke about the surprising news that Vice President Kamala Harris will be the Democratic nominee, questioning why the 14 million people who voted for Biden in the primaries are being overlooked. He criticized Harris, saying that during her time in the Biden administration, the country has gone from having a secure border and low crime rates to facing serious issues like inflation and high gas prices. Jordan ended by dismissing the idea that Trump could be blamed for current economic problems, emphasizing that Trump hasn't been in office for years.
I want to talk specifically about what Walz is bringing to this ticket, because we talked about how he wasn't well known. He didn't really have that national profile. He's from the Midwest, but he's from a state that is blue already. He has a very progressive record. What do you think he brings to this ticket that's someone that Governor Josh Shapiro didn't?
First of all, we don't really know all the reasons. And in fact, some CNN commentators who are not friendly to the Republicans have said that there was just outright anti-Semitism against him. But there were also issues related to his role as a prosecutor, and there were rumors about sexual harassment issues. I don't know if those involved him or, not treating seriously other people in his office or something like that. I just don't know. But I can tell you, I think that a number of Jewish Americans do think that there's a rising element of anti-Semitism that goes beyond anti-Israel within the Democratic Party, and this is new. This is absolutely new. It just hasn't existed on the left other than in 50 years ago, but the left was generally against that, and this is something new. So what does Walz bring? I think he brings folksiness, and that's on the positive side. On the negative side, I think he brings a record which, like so many progressive governors and so many progressive mayors, is just subject to huge amounts of criticism. I mean, Gavin Newsom had nice hair and presents himself very well, but California is a disaster. And it's pretty hard to turn California into a disaster, but he's managed. And so I would say that there's a lot of that in Minnesota. Minnesota is not the state that a lot of us used to love 50 years ago. What happened? Almost all the people who were arrested were let go. And by the way, any who needed bail, Kamala Harris advocated putting up the bail for them. So they're going to be subject to a lot of that criticism. And remember, it's a sanctuary state at a time when people are sort of sick and tired of that virtue signaling. But as soon as people started flooding in, they said, well, wait a minute, we can't pay for the schools. We can't pay for the housing for people who don't have homes and so forth. So you're going to have a lot of that coming at both Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. Having said all that, I don't think normally the vice presidential candidates make much of a difference.
Tim Walz, a relatively unknown figure with a strong progressive record from a blue state in the Midwest, was picked for the ticket to bring a folksy appeal. However, his record could face significant criticism, similar to other progressive leaders, due to issues like high crime rates and policies that haven't yielded good results. Some believe his selection over Josh Shapiro might be tied to growing concerns of anti-Semitism within the Democratic Party, though the full reasons for Shapiro's exclusion aren't clear. Despite these challenges, vice presidential candidates typically don't have a major impact on elections.
Was asked by his country to go to Iraq. You know what he did? He dropped out of the Army and allowed his unit to go without him. What bothers me about Tim Walz is the stolen valor garbage. Do not pretend to be something that you're not.
J.D. Vance is slamming the military record of his rival for the vice presidency, Tim Walz. The Ohio senator is alleging the Minnesota governor deliberately, quote, abandoned his unit by retiring before it was deployed to Iraq nearly 20 years ago. After 24 years of military service, Walz retired in 2005 and ran for Congress. The campaign added Governor Walz would never insult or undermine any American service to this country. Joining us now is James Laporta, who is a verification producer for the CBS News Confirmed team, our fact-checking unit. James, thanks so much for joining us. So talk to us about what it is we know for certain about Tim Walz's military record.
So what we know for certain is Governor Tim Walz, he joined the military, joined the National Guard at 17, served in both the Nebraska and Minnesota National Guard, National Army Guard units. He served for over 24 years, earned several Army Commendation Medals and Achievement Medals. He trained as an infantryman when he was in Nebraska. When he moved over to Minnesota, he was field artillery.
So what is it that remains unknown about Walz's time in the military that, if not lending credibility to Vance's claims, doesn't completely invalidate them either?
So for me personally, the question that I've had out to him and both the Minnesota National Guard is that perhaps, just for my purposes, I would like for documentation and also for timeline purposes, is at what point did Governor Walz decide to retire? Exactly when did he actually submit the paperwork to retire? He retired in May of 2005. So arguably, it's conceivable that he submitted paperwork several months before that. But for my timeline purposes, I would like to know when, especially because there's these questions of whether or not he abandoned his unit or not. That's not for me to say. There are people out there that. He was over the 20-year mark when he retired, and there are soldiers who back him up on that, who say he could retire whenever he wanted. But just for my purposes, in terms of the job that I do here, I would like to know exactly when he submitted his retirement papers.
J.D. Vance criticized Tim Walz for allegedly abandoning his unit by retiring just before they were deployed to Iraq. Walz's campaign responded, noting that after 24 years of military service, he retired in 2005 and then ran for Congress. While Walz served in the National Guard and earned several medals, questions remain about the exact timing of his retirement and whether he knew about the deployment when he made that decision.
If you ever want to know what the Dems are up to, just listen to what they accuse you of doing. Take the word weird. It was first uttered by a guy named Tim Walz, directed at another guy called J.D. Vance. But turns out, as usual, it's a preemptive projection. For the Dems always call you on stuff that they're about to do or have already done. They accuse you of election interference before they do it. They accuse you of racism before they do it. They accuse you of censorship right before they try to shut you up. Now, Walz is weird, but he disguises it under the costume of phony compassion, a fake politician who masks destructive ideas under the guise of empathy. At a 2017 town hall, he implied 10-year-old boys should be able to invade girls' bathrooms because it's all about safety. Quote, as a teacher, my #1 responsibility in the classroom is the safety, security, and belongingness of every single child in that room. These are children my son's age, a 4th grader, a 10-year-old who just wants to go to the bathroom. And their identity is they are male or female, and they just go in that bathroom and use it. End quote. Belongingness. Yeah, they'll be belonging in therapy with this guy at the helm. But whose expertise does he rely upon for his Midwestern takes? Here's Minnesota State Rep Leigh Finke, who wants to train more children's doctors on sex change surgery and puberty blockers. He sponsored the Trans Refuge Bill, which Walz signed, which makes Minnesota a sanctuary state for such butchery.
If you promise trans refuge, then we need to increase the number of people who are offering gender-affirming care. So we have some money, hopefully we can pass, to help entice people to move from those states who also practice gender-affirming care. We want to do internship programs and fellowship programs with Children's Minnesota and other places where people can learn gender-affirming care.
It's now available for babysitting. And that's the perfect person to give advice for impressionable kids. I don't know. Strangers that want to take in runaways with perfectly good parents who don't want them sterilized, that's weird. I wouldn't send my son to St. Paul. He may come back as St. Paula. There are other weird things about Walz, of course. He fibs about his military service. He set up a snitch line to narc on citizens for not wearing masks outside. And he's super weird on free speech.
I think we need to push back on this. There's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation or hate speech, and especially around our democracy.
There's no guarantee. What? I guess his class didn't cover the First Amendment. But if misinformation isn't free speech, then shouldn't he arrest himself for lying about his service? My main point, Walz made himself fair game. since his only attack was that the other guy was weird. Because everyone is weird, the more you get to know them. It's why marriage is a commitment. Over time, both spouses realize we're all bat crazy. That's thinking children can decide to have themselves castrated. And that's Tim Walz. His sin, among many, is that he smeared Vance for being human. His accusation assumes that he's not. And once you make that claim, all bets are off. You think Vance is weird and you want to operate on healthy kids? If saying crazy cat ladies is weird, what if you want to turn someone's son into one? So congrats, Walz, you're a weirdo. So are we, but at least we don't lie about it, unlike you. But maybe that's because you're way weirder than we can even imagine. But didn't Walz make a mistake by breaking the weird seal? Like, there's no non-weird person. Yeah. So it's like, once he said that, it's like, okay, we're coming after you.
Well, and the word you use, folksy. So this is a lot of the headlines we're seeing. He's lovable. He's like your dad next door, your grandpa, your coach. I mean, so he's supposed to be the normie, we're told. Those are the words the kids use now.
Yes.
As you know. But when you talk about things like free speech, and because 9 of the weirdos I like to hang out with most are at the Supreme Court. And they have decided 8-1 in some really controversial cases that the most hateful, weird stuff that you would say is protected by the First Amendment, because it's not rainbows and puppies and all that we have to protect. But here's the deal. We got to get past all of the love fest at some point. That's any new candidate gets that. But you have to get to where he is on his policy positions. You outlined some of them. Now, some people may love that, but they need to know what they are so they can decide how to vote.
Exactly. Now, you did cover the Supreme Court, and they are all perverts.
I didn't say perverts.
No, I mean, come on, they wear
weirdos,
robes. We know they're not wearing anything underneath the robes.
I can neither confirm nor deny that.
Jim Jordan and Greg Gutfeld discussed how political accusations often reflect what the accusers are actually doing themselves. He commented on how Democrats label others as weird while engaging in questionable actions such as supporting gender-affirming care for children and restricting free speech. Gutfeld pointed out the irony in accusing others of misconduct while engaging in it. He also humorously criticized Tim Walz for his alleged inconsistencies and awkward stances, suggesting that everyone is weird. But some actions are beyond just being odd. They're potentially harmful.
We're not afraid of weird people. No. We're a little bit creeped out, but we're not afraid.
It's not about her or her opponent, really. It's no matter what kind of weird stuff they keep saying.
Donald Trump has been resorting to some wild lies about my record, and some of what he and his running mate are saying, well, it's just plain weird.
The new talking point, weird, which seems to have been started, at least as far as I can tell, by Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. He seemed to set off something of a trend among national Democrats. Walz, if you do not know, is a veteran and a gun owner and a former public school teacher with close ties to organized labor, and he joins us now. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Governor, thanks so much for joining us. Mr. Trump and Mr. Vance were in your home state last night. Democratic-funded polling I saw earlier this month showed Minnesota, which has not gone for a Republican president since Nixon, within half a percentage point if Biden was the nominee.
Look, good morning, Jake. Thanks for having me. Look, there's a burst of energy out here. Joe Biden, we've heard it, he delivered across the board on so many issues, but there's a new burst of energy. I was at a labor rally yesterday, and I've not seen anything like this for 15 years. And what you saw out in St. Cloud yesterday with Donald Trump and J.D. Vance is the same old nonsense, just talking points and denigrating folks. And I think she's more boosted because she's bringing a positive vision. Look, we care about what happens to your kids. We care about the environment. We care about job creation. So it's just a whole new vibe to the campaign. I think Minnesota always competitive, but we're certainly going to win.
So you've gotten some attention this week for calling Trump and Vance and Republicans in general weird. And I think that you're the one that set this tone. And there's this shift. The Harris campaign seems to be following your lead, echoing this language. Why do you think weird is a more effective attack line against Trump than what Democrats have been done previously, which is argue that he's an existential threat to democracy?
But my point on this is people kept talking about, look, Donald Trump is going to put women's lives at risk. That's 100% true. Donald Trump is potentially going to end constitutional liberties that we have, end voting. I do believe all those things are a real possibility, but it gives him way too much power. Listen to the guy. He's talking about Hannibal Lecter and shocking sharks and just whatever crazy thing pops into his mind. And I thought we just give him way too much credit. And I think one of the things is when you just ratchet down some of the the scariness or whatever and just name it what it is. That seems very weird to me that an adult can go through 6.5 years of being in the public eye. If he has laughed, it's at someone, not with someone. That is weird behavior. And I don't think you call it anything else. It is simply what we're observing.
We are in this unprecedented situation right now because Democratic voters had a deep lack of confidence in President Biden's ability to serve another term. You belittled his effort. You called it a political sideshow. You called it a crazy thing. But wasn't Dean Phillips actually right? Wasn't he bringing up an issue that was correct, and you were on the wrong side of that?
Well, look, what I said was, as President Biden was delivering, I was the governor of a state that watched Donald Trump tell people to drink bleach when the Mayo Clinic was giving us good advice. Joe Biden followed that advice and saved people's lives. And I was watching Joe Biden deliver on every front. And the voters were there with him. They were saying he was there. And aging isn't a conspiracy. It simply happens. And last night, I'm sitting in the nook eating a Juicy Lucy, and who calls Joe Biden to say thanks to him for standing with me? That's the type of guy he is, and that's how I knew him. So look, I wasn't belittling Dean personally. I just thought, look, he's in the middle of dealing with these crises, and we're out here saying he's too old, he's doing this. He was doing the work. The day before the debate, he was on the phone with me for 20 minutes talking about the flooding up the Blue Earth River where you saw the dam on television looking like it was going to break. I applaud Joe Biden. I think he made the right decision in terms of where he's at and the ability to prosecute this case against Donald Trump's weirdness and our policies that are making a difference. So it's where we're at. I'm excited about it. I think we eventually needed to get here.
Tim Walz, a former veteran, teacher, and gun owner with a progressive record, was chosen for the ticket, despite concerns that he might not add much appeal beyond his Midwestern roots. There's speculation that Josh Shapiro wasn't picked for the ticket due to his pro-Israel stance and unverified rumors about his time as a prosecutor. Despite all the criticism, the impact of vice presidential picks is often limited.
Trump running mate J.D. Vance criticized Harris running mate Tim Walz this week, accusing him of abandoning his unit deploying to Iraq and misrepresenting his service record. Walz served 2 decades plus in the Army National Guard before retiring in 2005. I want to play out a quick soundbite that we heard from Vance.
When the United States Marine Corps, when the United States of America asked me to go to Iraq to serve my country, I did it. I did what they asked me to do it, and I did it honorably, and I'm very proud of that service. When Tim Walz was asked by his country to go to Iraq, you know what he did? He dropped out of the Army and allowed his unit to go without him, a fact that he's been criticized for aggressively by a lot of the people that he served with. I also think it's dishonest. Something, again, if you guys ever get an opportunity to ask Tim Walz or Kamala Harris some questions, he made this interesting comment that the Kamala Harris campaign put out there, and I bet they're regretting they put it out there now, because he said that and he was making a point about gun control, he said we shouldn't allow weapons that I used in war to be on America's streets. Well, I wonder, Tim Walz, when were you ever in war? What was this weapon that you carried into war, given that you abandoned your unit right before they went to Iraq? He wants to criticize me for getting an Ivy League education. I'm proud of the fact that my mamaw supported me, that I was able to make something of myself. I'd be ashamed if I was him and I lied about my military service like he did.
Al Kemper still standing by to break this down, and how can you help us make sense of what he said there? Is stolen valor the correct choice of words?
Well, Austin, there's a little bit of hyperbole that's out there on this. Let me just explain what it is. Okay, J.D. Vance joined the Marine Corps. He was a public affairs specialist. He deployed over to Iraq into a combat zone. He did carry a weapon in combat. All right, that's his record. All right, stayed in the enlisted ranks. At some point, he got a college degree, but he apparently never transitioned over to being into the officer program. But he had served served a 24-year career, and he had taken the billet of a command sergeant major in an Army National Guard unit, an artillery battalion. I've worked with the National Guard all over the country. I've worked very intensely with them. And sometimes these billets, command positions and other things can be a little political. And I'll leave it at that because, you know, the adjutant general is a political appointee of the governor. And so you see some politics in some of these small town National Guard units. You see it sometimes in the regular reserve units as well. So he'd taken a very high level, prestigious position of command sergeant major. According to the National Guard, what I've seen is he'd put in his announcement to retire or put his papers to retire about 5 to 7 months before he actually retired. But he had taken the billet of command sergeant major, the most senior enlisted member of that or soldier in that unit. And then he dropped, and there was a prepare deploy order coming out. As a command sergeant major, he probably would have known that that order was coming. He probably did. He retired, and what it said on the website was then served in Congress. Well, not quite. He ran for Congress. If he had taken those deployment orders in 2025, he would have been overseas serving until at least late spring or summer of 2006. And that probably would have taken him out of the entire primary season. Very unlikely he would have won the primary for Congress. And he never, at least in that election cycle, would not probably have served in Congress. And I'm sure that's where they got that information to J.D. Vance about the politics or whatever happened and the sequence of events of what happened. Now, carrying the gun in combat, as far as I can tell from his record, he never served in a combat zone at any time in his career. He was deployed overseas to Italy to support Desert Storm, but he didn't go to Kuwait or Saudi Arabia or anything like that. So that is actually a correct statement. Did a lot of stuff. He was an infantryman, and then he was an artillery unit. So I don't want to take away from anything they did there, but they may have overstated some things or misstated some things on the website. He did not retire as a command sergeant major because he didn't finish that professional military education. He actually retired before he finished. That's a requirement to claim the retired rank of command sergeant major.
I want to ask real quick. Vance enlisted in the Marines after graduating from high school in 2003 and would go on to serve for a total of 4 years. In 2005, he spent 6 months in Iraq as a military journalist. What does that job entail?
Basically, they're covering whatever the Marines are doing. And so they're out there, they're doing press conferences or working with journalists, to include possibly Fox journalists that may have been embedded with Marine Corps units, and they would be writing press announcements and stuff like that. He'd be working for a public affairs officer with that unit and probably a small public affairs staff, but that's what they do. Now, in fairness, that's not like an infantryman or some other jobs which would be in more direct combat roles, if you will. You're inherently in a combat zone. There is a implicit danger with that. And I actually served with a public affairs officer before Desert Storm, before Operation Iraqi Freedom, and very sadly, she was killed in an improvised explosive device in Iraq. So you can't say that that's a non-combat job per se, because once you're in a combat zone, everybody's in a combat zone.
J.D. Vance criticized Tim Walz for allegedly abandoning his National Guard unit before they were deployed to Iraq. Vance, who served in the Marine Corps and was deployed to Iraq. Walz served over 24 years in the Army National Guard, including holding the position of Command Sergeant Major, but retired in 2005 before completing the deployment. While Walz did not serve in a combat zone, he had a long military career. Vance's criticism touches on Walz's decision to retire before his unit was deployed and questions the integrity of his military record.
Okay, and the Trump campaign is now reacting to Harris's VP pick. For more on this, I want to bring in CBS News campaign reporter Jake Rosen. Jake, walk us through what they're saying.
Hey, Chanel, thank you for having me on. Caroline Leavitt, a Trump campaign press secretary, just sent out a statement calling Tim Walz a West Coast wannabe who spent his governorship trying to reshape Minnesota in the image of the Golden State. So already trying to brand this Tim Walz, who's kind of an everyman, as you guys have all heard, calling him dangerously liberal and a left-wing candidate and an extremist. So we've seen them come out. Obviously, we saw J.D. Vance earlier today say that if it was not Josh Shapiro that the Democrats were afraid of the left-wing, quote, anti-Semitic part of their party. Tim Walz is obviously not Jewish, but we've seen kind of this Trump campaign preparation for what a potential VP pick from Harris looks like.
The Trump campaign is criticizing Kamala Harris's choice of Tim Walz as her running mate, calling him a West Coast wannabe who is trying to reshape Minnesota in California's image.